The massive chamber of the galactic Concord stretched endlessly in all directions. Living crystal walls glowed softly, while the ceiling displayed actual stars, a window into infinite space. Here, leaders from 17 different species met to decide the fate of entire worlds. High Arbiter Keith took his position at the center platform. His purple scales shimmered under starlight, marking his royal status among the Sith X people. His kind were fighters and empire builders who controlled 300 star systems and craved more. Today, though, Keith wasn't here to discuss expansion. He came to ask a question that had troubled his people for countless generations. "Tell me why Sector 7G stays forbidden to us," he demanded, his voice booming through the chamber. Whispers rippled through the gathered delegates. The insect-like Kicks clicked their jaws approvingly. The gas-dwelling Omniths swirled with interested colors. Even the stone-bodied Bravari shifted their enormous frames to pay attention. Sector 7G remained a puzzle, a lone yellow star at the edge of explored space, wrapped in a forbidden zone no vessel could breach. The ban was older than most civilizations present. Nobody remembered its origin. Nobody dared question it until this moment. "The ban has existed for 12,000 years, replied Ambassador Voth of the Omnith, his gaseous body rippling with irritation. "Why challenge it now? My people require resources." Keith responded. "War with the Cricks bleeds us dry. The asteroid fields in Sector 7G hold minerals worth entire star systems. And what protects them? Just an old law and basic radio waves from one planet." "The law exists with purpose," said a new voice. Everyone turned. The speaker wasn't a regular delegate. It was something far older. The Valanth rarely attended these meetings. They needed neither politics nor trade. They were ancient beyond counting. Their bodies formed from crystal that existed when the galaxy was young. They observed, they remembered, and occasionally when necessary they spoke. This one was called the Witness. Rumors said it was the oldest living creature in the galaxy. Its crystal form towered over other delegates, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. "The law exists because we made it," the Witness continued. "Long before your kind crawled from Birth Ocean's Arbiter, before the Kicks built their first colony, before any of you existed, we discovered what lives in Sector 7G. Keith narrowed his eyes. "What lives there that scares the mighty Valanth?" The Witness stayed silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice changed, softer, almost sorrowful. "They name themselves humans." Another wave of murmurs swept the assembly. Humans, the word held no meaning for most present. A basic species on a basic world. Radio signals and chemical rockets. Nothing worth fearing. "We found them ages ago," the Witness went on. "They were barely more than creatures then, fighting each other with sharp stones and dwelling in caves. But we noticed something in them, something that made us observe more carefully." "What did you notice?" asked one of the Bravari, its voice like grinding stone. "Potential. Terrible potential." The Witness's crystal body flickered with ancient memories. "They learned faster than any species we'd ever seen. In the time it took others to master fire, they'd constructed cities. In the time others built cities, they'd unlocked atomic power. They advanced faster than anything we'd witnessed." Keith laughed. "So they're smart. Many species are smart. That's no reason to fear them. You misunderstand." The Witness moved closer. Despite himself, Keith stepped backward. "It's not their intelligence that makes them dangerous. It's what drives them beneath it. We studied them, Arbiter. We observed them for thousands of years, and what we saw terrified us." The hall became completely quiet. Nobody had ever heard a Valanth confess to fear. "They aren't bound by logic," the Witness explained. "They don't follow the laws that govern all rational life. They'll sacrifice themselves for abstract ideas. They'll die for concepts. They'll burn their own worlds rather than surrender them. And worst of all, they remember. They carry hatreds for generations, passing anger from parent to child like precious treasures." "Superstition," Keith said, though his voice held less certainty. "Old tales to frighten younglings." "I wish that were true." The Witness turned to address everyone. "We contacted them just once. We sent representatives to their world when they were still developing. We intended to guide them, help them, show them the path to the stars." "What happened?" asked Ambassador Voth. "They welcomed us initially. They were curious, eager to understand. But then one of our scientists showed disrespect to one of their leaders. A minor thing, a protocol breach that would mean nothing to any civilized species." The Witness paused. "They killed him. Not quickly, not cleanly. They kept him alive for days, learning everything they could about our biology, our vulnerabilities. Then they broadcast a message to our ships." "What message?" Keith asked. 2 words, leave now. We thought it was bluffing. We possessed technology they couldn't imagine, weapons beyond their comprehension. We sent a single warship to demonstrate our power, a small display, nothing that would harm their world, just enough to show them their place. The witness's form flickered again. They destroyed it. We still don't understand how. They were using wooden sailing ships on their oceans, yet somehow they destroyed a Volanth warship. When we sent investigators to discover what happened, they found nothing. The humans had taken everything. The technology, the bodies, the records, everything. Impossible, said one of the Crix delegates. No primitive species could destroy Volanth technology. That's what we believed. So we sent a larger force, 50 ships, enough to conquer any world in the galaxy at that time. And, Keith demanded. None returned. We received a final transmission from the fleet commander before all contact ceased. She reported they'd been boarded, that humans were inside the ships, that they were everywhere and nowhere. And then she said something that has haunted us ever since. The witness's voice dropped to a whisper. She said they were smiling. A chill spread through the assembly. Even Keith felt it, though he'd never admit it. After that, the witness continued, we made a decision. We wouldn't try to conquer the humans. We wouldn't attempt contact again. We would seal their system and hope they never found escape. We erased all records of our encounter. We forbade any species from entering their space, and we waited. Waited for what? Asked Ambassador Voth. For them to destroy themselves. That's what we hope. They're violent and self-destructive. They battle each other constantly. We believed they'd reduce their world to ashes before ever reaching the stars. The witness turned back to Keith. But they haven't destroyed themselves. They've grown. They've built flying machines. They've touched their own moon. And every day they come closer to breaking free of their cage. You're asking us to fear a species that's barely left their own world. Keith said. This is madness. I'm asking you to heed our warning. The quarantine must hold. Nobody must enter Sector. Nobody must contact the humans. Because if you do, if you provoke them, if you give them reason to turn their eyes toward the stars with rage in their hearts, you'll doom us all. Keith stayed silent for a moment. Then he laughed. I've heard enough. The mighty Volanth, rulers of the ancient galaxy, frightened of creatures who've barely discovered spaceflight. This isn't wisdom. This is weakness. Several delegates laughed with him. The Crix clicked their jaws in amusement. Even some Omnith flickered with skeptical color. I moved to lift the quarantine, Keith announced. Let us see these humans ourselves. Let us show them what real power looks like. I support the motion, said the Crix delegate. The witness said nothing. It simply stood there, ancient and silent as the assembly voted. The motion passed by a wide margin. Only the Volanth voted against it. When the vote finished, the witness turned and began drifting toward the exit. Where are you going? Keith called after it. The witness didn't turn around. Home, it said. To prepare. Prepare for what? Now the witness did turn. Its crystalline form caught the starlight. And for just a moment it seemed to contain all the sorrow of the ages, for the end of everything you know. Then it was gone. The assembly continued its business. Trade agreements were signed. Territorial disputes were settled. The lifting of the quarantine was celebrated as a triumph of progress over superstition. 300 years passed. The Sith X Dominion grew powerful. Their war with the Crix continued, draining resources from both sides. And all the while the riches of Sector 7G called to them. Untapped asteroid fields, virgin planets, wealth beyond imagination. High Arbiter Keith had long since died, but his descendants carried his ambition. His great-great-grandson, also named Keith in his honor, rose to command the Dominion's greatest fleet, 16 dreadnoughts, 400 support vessels, the most powerful military force the Sith X had ever assembled, and it was aimed at a single yellow star on the edge of known space. Commander Keith stood on his flagship's bridge, watching stars streak past as his fleet traveled through hyperspace. In a few hours they'd arrive at the Sol system. They'd claim its riches. They'd add humanity to their list of conquered species. He'd read the old records, the warnings, the stories of vanished fleets and smiling killers. He considered them nothing but propaganda. The Volanth were old and tired. They feared everything. But the humans were just humans, a single species on a single world. They'd never faced a real enemy. They'd never seen the power of a true interstellar civilization. They would learn. Commander said his second, a young officer named Vithal, will arrive at the Sol system in 3 hours. Good. Prepare the broadcast. I want these humans to know who their new masters are. Yes, Commander. And if they resist, Keith smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Then we'll teach them the cost of resistance. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Keith looked at the view screen and saw the yellow star at the center, surrounded by its collection of planets. The third one from the star was his target, a blue and green world covered in water and vegetation. Earth. He could see their satellites, their space stations, primitive things barely worthy of the name. They'd fall in minutes. Open a channel, he commanded. All frequencies. Channel open, Commander. Keith leaned forward. This was the moment he'd waited for. Attention, people of Earth. I am Commander Keith of the Sith X Dominion. Your quarantine has ended. You are now under Dominion jurisdiction. You will surrender immediately. You will grant us full access to your planet and its resources. In return, we'll elevate you to the status of a client species under our protection. Resist, and you will be destroyed. You have 1 hour to comply. He sat back, satisfied. The humans would see his fleet. They'd understand the hopelessness of their situation. They'd surrender. The response came in less than a minute. Sith X vessel, this is Earth Defense Command. Identify yourselves. State your intentions. You've entered sovereign space without authorization. Keith frowned. This wasn't the fearful response he'd expected. I've already stated my intentions, human. You will surrender immediately. There was a pause. Then the human voice returned. We decline. Leave. 2 words. Just like the Valanth legend. Keith felt a chill run down his spine, but he pushed it aside. He wouldn't be frightened by coincidence. You misunderstand your position, he said. I have 16 dreadnoughts, 400 warships, enough firepower to turn your entire planet to glass. Surrender is not a request. Another pause. Longer this time. Then a different voice came through the channel. Older, calmer. A voice that had seen things Keith couldn't imagine. Sith X Commander. This is Admiral Chen of Earth Defense Command. I'm going to say this once, so listen carefully. We know who you are. We know why you're here. And we know what you did to the Valanth fleet 3,000 years ago. Keith's blood went cold. That was impossible. The Valanth had erased all records. That's right, Admiral Chen continued. We found their ships. We studied them. We learned from them. We've been preparing for this day for a very long time. You're bluffing. Maybe the Valanth should have wondered how a species with wooden ships managed to board their vessels. The Admiral's voice hardened. Last chance, Commander. Turn around. Go home. Tell your people that Earth isn't worth the cost. Because if you stay, if you fire a single shot, we'll show you exactly why the Elders sealed us away. Keith's hand trembled. For just a moment he considered retreat. For just a moment he remembered the old stories, the warnings, the fear in the witness's voice. Then his pride took over. Fire on their orbital stations, he commanded. Show them what happens to those who defy the Dominion. Commander, are you sure? The Elders warned us about, I said. Fire. The weapons officer hesitated for just a second, then obeyed. Beams lanced out from the dreadnought, striking the nearest human station. It exploded in a ball of fire and debris. Secondary explosions rippled through its structure as atmosphere vented into space. Keith smiled. Let the humans see what true power looked like. Then Admiral Chen's voice came through one final time. You were warned. The channel went dead, and somewhere in the cold depths of space the humans began to move. The first attack came 3 days after Commander Keith destroyed the orbital station. He'd expected immediate retaliation, a desperate counterattack by primitive ships that his fleet would crush without effort. Instead, there was nothing. The humans went silent. Their remaining stations powered down. Their ships retreated to low orbit around Earth. Keith took this as a sign of surrender. He moved his fleet closer, preparing to begin occupation. He was wrong. The attack didn't come from Earth. It came from behind. A supply ship at the rear of the fleet exploded without warning. Then another. Then 3 more. By the time Keith realized what was happening, 12 of his support vessels were nothing but burning wreckage. Report, he screamed. What hit us? Unknown, Commander, the sensor officer said, staring at his screens in disbelief. We detected no weapons fire, no missiles, no energy signatures. The ships just exploded. Ships don't just explode. Find me answers. But there were no answers. The Sith X had the most advanced sensors in the known galaxy. They could detect a shuttle at 10 light-years. They could track a missile across an entire star system. They couldn't find what was killing them. More explosions rippled through the fleet. A fuel tanker erupted, taking 2 nearby frigates with it. A communications relay was torn apart from the inside. One of the dreadnoughts reported intruders in its engineering section, then went silent. "They're inside us," the Thou whispered. "Commander, they're inside our ships." "Impossible. Our shields are up. Our hulls are sealed." "Then how are they doing this?" Keith had no answer. He watched his view screen as another dreadnought listed to one side. Smoke pouring from its engines. Something had crippled its power systems. Something that had gotten inside without triggering a single alarm. "Get me Admiral Chen," he ordered. Now, the communications officer worked frantically. After several minutes, the human's face appeared on the view screen. She looked calm, almost bored. "Commander Keith. Having trouble. What are you doing? What weapons are you using?" Admiral Chen smiled. It was the smile from the old story, the smile that had haunted the Valanth for 3,000 years. "Weapons? We haven't fired a single weapon yet, Commander. These are just our welcome gifts. Small packages we attached to your ships while you were making your speech. Our people have been aboard your vessels since you arrived." "That's impossible. We scanned for technology. You scanned for energy signatures. You didn't scan for people floating in the void with nothing but a suit and a bomb." Her smile widened. "Did you know humans can survive in space for almost 2 minutes without protection? Just long enough to attach a surprise to your hull and get back to the shuttle." Keith felt sick. "You sent your own people into space without protection. We sent volunteers, thousands of them. People who knew they might not come back. People who chose to risk their lives for their world." She leaned forward. "That's what you don't understand about us, Commander. We're not afraid of death. We've been dying for our homes since before your species existed. It's what we do." Another explosion. Another ship lost. "Call them off," Keith demanded. "We'll negotiate." "You destroyed our station. You killed 800 people. Engineers, scientists, families." Chen's voice was cold as ice. "There will be no negotiation. There will only be consequences." The channel went dead. The attacks continued for 6 hours. By the time they stopped, Keith had lost 93 ships. Not to weapons fire, not to enemy fleets, but to humans who had floated through space with bombs strapped to their backs, found their targets and completed their missions even as they died. Keith ordered a retreat to the outer system. He needed time to regroup, time to understand what he was facing. But the humans didn't give him time. The second wave came from the asteroid belt. Mining ships, cargo haulers, vessels that looked like they'd been built in a scrapyard from spare parts and prayer. They shouldn't have been able to fight a Sith X patrol boat, let alone a dreadnought. But they didn't fight like Sith X. They fought like humans. The first mining ship came in on a collision course with the dreadnought Vengeance. The Sith X gunners opened fire, confident in their superior weapons. The mining ship exploded under their barrage. And then the debris kept coming. The humans had packed the ship with metal fragments, millions of pieces of shrapnel traveling at the same speed as the original vessel. The Vengeance's shields held against the first wave. But the second wave brought more ships, more debris, more fragments. Death by 1,000 cuts. The Vengeance's shields failed after 40 minutes of continuous bombardment. Once they were down, a single human ship flew directly into the dreadnought's exposed hull. The explosion killed everyone on board. "They're ramming us," the Thal said, his voice hollow. "They're using their own ships as missiles." "No species does that," Keith replied. "No species sacrifices ships and crew for a single kill. Humans do." The battle lasted for 3 weeks. The Sith X had superior technology, superior numbers, superior everything. It didn't matter. The humans didn't play by the rules of civilized warfare. They didn't meet the Sith X fleet in open battle. They hid. They waited. They struck at supply lines and fuel depots. They used tricks that no rational species would consider. They dropped rocks from asteroids onto Sith X position. They hacked into communication networks and broadcast false orders. They captured a damaged frigate and flew it back to the fleet with a skeleton crew, only to detonate a hidden bomb once it was inside the defensive perimeter. They turned every advantage against the Sith X. The dreadnoughts were powerful, but they were slow. The Sith X shields were strong, but they needed time to recharge. The Sith X soldiers were disciplined, but they'd never faced an enemy that didn't care about dying. And through it all, the humans learned. Every weapon the Sith X used, the humans studied. Every tactic they employed, the humans analyzed. Every piece of technology they left behind, the humans collected. 6 months into the war, the first human ship with Sith X-style shields appeared. It was crude, unstable. It failed after a single battle, but the second one worked, and the third one worked better. And by the time a year had passed, human ships were appearing throughout Sith-X space, with technology that should have taken centuries to develop. Commander Keith sent a message to Dominion High Command. He'd lost half his fleet. He'd failed to take Earth. He'd failed to even establish a foothold in the Sol system. And now the humans were pushing back. The response from High Command was immediate. Reinforcements were on the way. The Dominion wouldn't be humiliated by primitives. But Keith knew the truth. He'd seen it in the eyes of his soldier. He'd felt it in his own heart. The Sith-X were afraid. The reinforcements arrived 2 months later. Another 12 dreadnoughts, 300 support ships, fresh troops who'd never faced humans, who still believed the war would be easy. They learned quickly. The humans had changed their tactics. They were no longer content to defend. They attacked constantly, relentlessly. They hit targets throughout Sith-X territory, appearing from nowhere and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. They bombed fuel depots. They assassinated commanders. They freed prisoners from labor camps and recruited them as soldiers. They turned the Sith-X's own conquered peoples against them, and they used fear as a weapon. The Sith-X were used to enemies who fought with honor, enemies who announced themselves, enemies who followed rules. Humans followed no rules. They killed in silence. They struck in darkness. They left messages written in blood on the walls of command centers. They broadcast the screams of dying Sith-X soldiers on military frequencies, letting the sound echo through every ship in the fleet. They made the Sith-X afraid to sleep. Admiral Keith, as he was now called after his father's death in battle, received a captured human soldier for interrogation. He wanted to understand. He needed to know what drove these creatures. The human was a woman, small, thin. She'd killed 7 Sith-X soldiers with nothing but a knife before they captured her. "Why do you fight?" Keith asked her. "You can't win. We have more ships, more soldiers, more resources. You must see that this war will end only one way." The woman looked at him with eyes that held no fear, no anger, just cold, patient determination. "You attacked our home," she said. "You killed our people. You threatened our children. So you fight for revenge." "No," she smiled that terrible smile. "We fight because that's what we do. We've been fighting since before we could stand upright. We fought animals. We fought the weather. We fought each other. We fight because it's in our blood. It's who we are." "Then you are animals," Keith said. "Savage beasts who can't control their instincts." "Maybe." The woman leaned forward as far as her restraints would allow. "But we're the beasts who tamed fire, who split the atom, who walked on our moon and dreamed of stars. And now we're the beasts who are coming for you. You will lose. Eventually. One of us will lose. But it won't be today. And it won't be tomorrow. And every day we survive, we get stronger. Every battle we fight, we learn more. Every weapon you use against us becomes a weapon we use against you." Her smile widened. "How long do you think you can keep this up, Admiral? How many soldiers are you willing to sacrifice? How many ships? How many worlds?" Keith said nothing. "Because I can tell you exactly how many we're willing to sacrifice." She looked directly into his eyes. "All of them. Every last one. We'll burn our own worlds before we let you take them. We'll fight to the last human, the last child, the last breath. That's what your elders tried to warn you about. That's why they sealed us away." She sat back. "We don't know how to stop. We never have, and you just gave us a reason to keep going forever." Keith had the woman executed. It didn't make him feel better. The war dragged on. Years passed. The Sith-X threw everything they had at humanity, and humanity threw it back twice as hard. The Dominion's economy crumbled under the strain. Worlds that had been conquered generations ago began to rebel, inspired by human resistance. The Cricks, smelling weakness, increased their attacks on Sith-X borders, and the humans kept coming. They took their first Sith-X colony world in the 7th year of the war, a small planet called Thoth Prime. The Sith-X had expected them to destroy it, to turn the surface to glass and kill everyone on it. Instead, the humans occupied it. They set up hospitals. They offered food and shelter to Sith-X civilians. They treated wounded soldiers and released them. It was the cruelest thing they could have done. Because the soldiers went home with stories. Stories of humans who could have killed them but chose not to. Stories of kindness mixed with terror. Stories that made no sense. How could a species that fought like demons also show mercy? Like saints? The answer came from a human broadcast, transmitted on all frequencies so every Sith-X in the galaxy could hear it. "People of the Dominion, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Alliance. Your leaders started this war. Your soldiers invaded our home. Your weapons killed our families, but we don't hold you responsible for the crimes of your rulers. We know that most of you never wanted this. You were following orders. You were doing your duty. We understand duty. So we're offering you a choice. The civilians on Vath Prime are free to leave whenever they wish. The soldiers we captured will be returned to their families. We take no pleasure in killing those who can't fight back. That is not who we are. Another pause. Longer. When Chen spoke again, her voice was harder. But make no mistake. We will not stop until this war ends. We will not negotiate while Sith X fleets threaten our worlds. And we will not forgive the architects of this invasion. Your high command will face justice for what they've done, not revenge. Justice. There is a difference. The broadcast ended. 3 weeks later, a rebellion erupted on Sith X Prime itself. Citizens who'd lost sons and daughters in a war they never wanted. Soldiers who'd seen the enemy up close and no longer believed the propaganda. Leaders who knew the war was lost and wanted to save what they could. Admiral Keith died in the fighting. Some said he was killed by rebels. Others said he took his own life when he realized what he'd unleashed upon his people. The truth died with him. The war officially ended, 11 years after it began. The Treaty of Seoul was signed in the same Great Hall where the Valanth had given their warning centuries before. The Sith X dominion was broken, not destroyed. The humans had made sure of that, but diminished, reduced, a shadow of what it had once been. And humanity stood among the stars for the first time, not as supplicants or subjects, but as conquerors who chose to show mercy. The Valanth watched in silence. They'd predicted war. They'd predicted destruction. They hadn't predicted this. The witness spoke to the human ambassador after the treaty was signed. You could have destroyed them, it said. You had the power, the justification. Why did you spare the ambassador? A young man named David Chen, grandson of the admiral who'd first faced the Sith X, considered the question carefully. Because we're not just warriors, he said finally. We're builders too, healers, teachers. We've spent our whole history learning how to destroy. But we've also learned how to create, how to forgive, how to move forward. The Sith X wouldn't have shown you the same mercy. I know, that's why we had to show it to them. Someone has to be first. Someone has to break the cycle. He smiled. A human expression that the Valanth were still learning to read. Besides, we're going to need allies for what comes next. What comes next? The Crix, the others, everyone who's watching to see what happens now. The ambassador's smile faded. They've seen what we can do in war. Now we need to show them what we can do in peace. That's how we survive. That's how any of us survive. The witness was silent for a long time. Perhaps it said finally, we were wrong about you. No, David Chen shook his head. You were right about us. Everything you said was true. We are dangerous. We are relentless. We don't know how to stop, but you forgot something important. What? We get to choose what we don't stop doing. And we choose to build, to help, to protect. His voice hard. But if anyone else comes for our home, they'll learn the other side of us real fast. That part hasn't changed. That part never will. The witness understood. For the first time in millennia it felt something it had thought impossible. Hope. But out in the galaxy, others were watching. Others were calculating. Others were convinced that the Sith X had simply been weak. The Crix Collective had learned nothing from the war they'd witnessed, and they were about to make the same mistake. The supreme mind of the Crix Collective watched the humans with 1,000. The Crix were not like other species. They didn't think as individuals. They were a hive, billions of bodies connected to a single vast intelligence. Each Crix drone was a cell in a greater organism. Each queen was a node in an endless network of thought, and the Supreme Mind was the brain that controlled it all. For 15 years, the Supreme Mind had studied humanity. It had watched them defeat the Sith X. It had analyzed their tactics, their weapons, their psychology. It had dissected every battle, every decision, every apparent weakness. And it had concluded that the Sith X were simply incompetent. The Dominion had sent 16 dreadnoughts. The Crix would send 1,600. The Sith X had relied on superior technology. The Crix would rely on overwhelming numbers. The Sith X had fought a war of pride. The Crix would fight a war of extermination. There would be no negotiation, no mercy, no survivors. The Supreme Mind gathered its forces in the darkness between stars, a fleet larger than any in galactic history, ships that blotted out the light of suns, soldiers numbered in the trillions. The humans had defeated an empire. Now they would face a hive. On Earth, the warning came 3 days before the invasion. Admiral Sarah Chen had retired after the Sith X war, but she'd trained her replacement well. Admiral James Okonkwo stood in the command center of Earth Defense Command, watching the sensor data scroll across his screens. "How many?" he asked. "We're still counting, sir," the sensor officer said, her voice steady but her hands trembling. "Current estimate is 1,600 capital ships, support vessels in the hundreds of thousands. Troop transports carrying, we don't have a number. Trillions, maybe. The Cricks don't do anything small, no sir." Okonkwo studied the display. The Cricks fleet was still 2 days out, gathering at the edge of the solar system. They were making no attempt to hide. Why would they? They wanted Earth to see what was coming. They wanted humanity to despair. They didn't understand humans at all. "Send word to all defense stations," Okonkwo ordered. "Begin evacuation of non-essential personnel from orbital platforms. Activate the deep space network. And get me a channel to the Volant." "The Volant, sir? They've been watching us since the Sith X War. Time to find out whose side they're on." The witness appeared on his screen an hour later. Its crystalline form flickered with colors that human eyes couldn't fully process. "Admiral Okonkwo, I wondered when you would call. You've seen the Cricks fleet." "I have seen it. It is the largest military force assembled in 10,000 years. Can we beat them?" The witness was silent for a long moment. "The Sith X came to conquer. The Cricks come to exterminate. They will not make the same mistakes. They will not underestimate you. They will not stop until every human is dead or your species proves impossible to kill." "That's not an answer." "No, it is not." The witness's form pulsed slowly. "I have watched your species for millennia. I have seen you survive ice ages and plagues. I have seen you split atoms and touch the stars. I have seen you defeat enemies who should have crushed you without effort. But this," it paused, "this is different. The Cricks are not like the Sith X. They feel no fear. They know no hesitation. They are a billion minds working as one. So we can't win?" "I did not say that. I said this is different." The witness leaned closer to the screen. "In all my years I have learned one truth about humanity. Whenever I believe I know what you are capable of, you prove me wrong." Okonkwo smiled grimly. "That's something at least. There is one more thing." The witness's form flickered with something that might have been "The Cricks believe they understand you. They have studied your tactics, your weapons, your history. They think they know how you fight. And they studied the humans who defeated the Sith X. They have not considered what a cornered humanity might do, what a desperate humanity might become." The witness paused. "Neither have I." "Then I guess we'll find out together." The channel closed. Okonkwo turned to his officers. Men and women who'd trained their entire lives for a war they hoped would never come. Behind them screens showed the evacuation in progress. Civilian ships fleeing to Mars colonies. Military personnel taking positions throughout the system. The entire human species preparing for the fight of its existence. "The Cricks think they're facing the same humans who fought the Sith X," Okonkwo said. "They're wrong. We've had 15 years to prepare. 15 years to learn. 15 years to build." He pulled up a tactical display. "The Sith X taught us how to fight. Now the Cricks are going to teach us how to survive." The first wave of Cricks arrived at the edge of the solar system on schedule. The Supreme Mind had calculated every variable, predicted every possible human response. It expected resistance. It expected casualties. It had factored these into its plans. What it didn't expect was silence. The human defense stations were dark. The orbital platforms showed no signs of activity. Earth's fleet was nowhere to be found. The entire solar system appeared abandoned. This was wrong. Humans didn't flee. The Supreme Mind had studied their history. They fought until the last defender fell. They never retreated without a reason. It sent scout ships forward to investigate. None returned. The scouts entered the asteroid belt and simply vanished. No explosions, no distress signals, no sensor data. One moment they were there. The next they were gone. The Supreme Mind ordered more ships forward. This time it watched through their sensors directly, processing every data point in real time. The scouts reached the outer asteroids. They began scanning for human presence. And then the asteroids moved. Millions of rocks, each one hiding a weapon. Some held missiles. Some held mines. Some held nothing at all. Just mass accelerated to incredible speeds and aimed at Crick's ships. The humans had spent 15 years turning the asteroid belt into a killing field. The scouts died screaming. But the Supreme Mind didn't panic. It had expected casualties. It had prepared for trap. It simply adjusted its calculations and sent the main fleet forward. The fleet pushed through the asteroid belt, losing ships by the hundreds. The humans had been thorough. Every rock seemed to hold a surprise. Every path led through a minefield. The journey that should have taken hours took days. But the Cricks were patient. They had numbers. They could afford to lose 1,000 ships for every mile gained. Eventually they reached the inner system. And there, waiting for them, was humanity. The defense platforms that had seemed dead came alive. Hidden stations revealed themselves. Ships that had been powered down lit their engines. And at the center of it all, orbiting Earth like a crown of iron, was the greatest fortress humanity had ever built. Station Phoenix. Okonkwo had spent a decade constructing it in secret. A platform the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that humanity had invented just for this moment. Particle beams, kinetic launchers, missile batteries, technologies that no other species had ever seen. The Cricks fleet paused. For the first time in its existence, the Supreme Mind felt something that might have been uncertainty. Then it attacked. The Battle of Sol was the largest conflict in galactic history. Millions of ships, trillions of lives, the fate of an entire species hanging in the balance. The Cricks came in waves. They didn't care about losses. They didn't care about casualties. They were a hive, and the hive would survive even if billions of drones died. They threw themselves at human defenses with mindless determination, trusting in numbers to carry the day. And for a while it worked. Human ships fell. Defense platforms were overwhelmed. Station Phoenix took damage that should have destroyed it 10 times over. The outer defensive lines collapsed one by one. But humanity didn't break. For every ship they lost, they made the Cricks pay double. For every platform that fell, another held twice as long. The defenders fought with a fury that the Supreme Mind hadn't calculated, couldn't comprehend, because the Cricks had made a mistake. The same mistake the Sith X had made before them. They had threatened Earth. Across the solar system, humans who'd never held a weapon picked up guns and went to fight. Scientists who'd spent their lives in laboratories flew cargo ships into enemy formations. Children said goodbye to their parents and went to die for a world they might never see again. The Cricks had studied human tactics. They hadn't studied human hearts. On the 4th day, Station Phoenix fell. Okonkwo had known it would happen. The Cricks simply had too many ships, too many soldiers, too much firepower. No defense could hold forever. But Phoenix's fall wasn't a defeat. It was a trap. As the Cricks swarmed over the station, Okonkwo gave his final order. The fusion reactors at Phoenix's core overloaded simultaneously. The explosion vaporized the station and everything within 1,000 kilometers. 300 Cricks capital ships died in an instant. Okonkwo died with them. His last words, broadcast on all frequencies, were simple. For Earth, the Supreme Mind reeled. It had lost more ships in that single explosion than the entire Sith X war had cost them. Its calculations were in ruins. Its predictions were worthless, and the humans kept fighting. With Phoenix gone, humanity fell back to the final line of defense, Earth itself. The Cricks expected this to be the end. The humans had nowhere left to run. Their fleets were shattered. Their stations were destroyed. All that remained was a single world, guarded by whatever forces humanity had left. The Supreme Mind ordered the final assault. What it found was a nightmare. Earth wasn't just defended. Earth was weaponized. Every ocean hid submarines loaded with nuclear missiles. Every mountain contained bunkers packed with soldiers. Every city was a fortress. Every citizen was a soldier. The humans had spent 15 years preparing their home world for this moment, and they'd done something else. Something the Cricks had never considered. They'd reached out to the Sith X. The ships that dropped out of hyperspace behind the Cricks fleet were not human. They were Sith X former enemies who'd learned what the Cricks had not, that humanity was terrible in war but generous in peace. The Sith X had come to repay a debt. Caught between human defenses and the Sith X fleet, the Cricks faltered. For the first time in the battle, the Supreme Mind considered retreat. But retreat wasn't in the Cricks' nature. They were a hive. They didn't flee. They won or they died. They chose death. The battle raged for 9 more days. The Cricks threw everything they had at Earth. The humans threw everything back. Cities burned. Continents shook. The sky itself seemed to crack under the weight of weapons fire. And then on the 9th day something broke. The Supreme Mind had always assumed it was invincible. A billion minds working as one. A network of thought that spanned star systems. Surely nothing could threaten such a being. But the humans had been listening to Cricks' communications since the war began. They'd learned how the hive worked, how the queens connected to the Supreme Mind, how information flowed through the collective. They'd found the weaknesses. On the 9th day, human special forces launched simultaneous attacks on 17 Krix command ships. Not to destroy them, that was impossible, but to plant something in their communication systems. A virus. A weapon that the Krix had never faced before. Chaos. The virus spread through the Hive network like wildfire. It corrupted data. It crossed signals. It made the Supreme Mind see enemies where there were none, and miss enemies that were right in front of it. For the first time in its existence, the Hive was confused. And in that moment of confusion, the humans struck. Coordinated attacks across the entire system. Every remaining ship, every surviving soldier, every weapon that could still fire. They hit the Krix with everything they had left. The Krix lines shattered. The Supreme Mind tried to regain control, tried to re-establish order, but the virus was everywhere now, spreading faster than it could be contained. Drones turned on each other. Queens gave contradictory orders. Ships collided with their own ally. The greatest hive in the galaxy was tearing itself apart. And the humans didn't stop. They hunted the surviving Krix ships across the system. They destroyed troop transports by the thousands. They showed no mercy, gave no quarter. They'd been pushed to the edge of extinction, and now they pushed back with all the fury their species could muster. By the end of the 10th day, the Krix invasion force was destroyed. Not defeated, destroyed. Of the 1,600 capital ships that had entered the Sol system, fewer than 100 escaped. The trillions of drones that had dreamed of conquering Earth were dead, their bodies floating in the void between worlds. And humanity, battered and bloodied but unbroken, stood victorious. The Supreme Mind retreated to its core systems to rebuild. It had lost more than ships and soldiers. It had lost something far more precious. Its certainty. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Krix collective knew fear. And out in the galaxy, everyone else was watching. The Valanth, the Omnith, the Bravri, the dozen smaller species who'd assumed humanity would be crushed. They'd all been wrong. The elders had warned them. They'd said humanity was dangerous. They'd said the humans should be left alone. No one had listened. Now everyone understood. But the war wasn't over. Humanity had survived the invasion. Now they had to decide what to do next. And their answer would change the galaxy forever. The celebrations on Earth lasted 3 days. 3 days of joy. 3 days of relief. 3 days of mourning for the billions who died defending their home. Then humanity went back to work. Admiral Maria Santos stood before the Council of Nations in the rebuilt United Earth Parliament. She was young for an admiral, just 42 years old. But the war had killed most of the senior officers. Those who remained had been promoted by necessity and hardened by law. The Krix will be back, she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a fire that hadn't been there before the war. Their invasion failed, but their hive survives. The Supreme Mind is wounded, not dead. Given time, they'll rebuild. They'll return with an even larger fleet. And next time they won't underestimate us. The council chamber fell silent. We have 2 choices, Santos continued. We can wait here, rebuild our defenses, hope that the next invasion takes long enough for us to prepare. Or, she paused, or we can take the fight to them. The debate lasted for weeks. Some argued for defense. Earth was wounded. The fleet was shattered. Humanity needed time to recover. Others argued for attack. The Krix had shown they would never stop. As long as the Supreme Mind existed, humanity would never be safe. Better to strike now while the enemy was weak. In the end, they voted for war. Not a war of conquest. Not a war of revenge. A war of survival. Humanity would find the Krix. They would destroy their ability to threaten Earth. They would make sure that no species ever dared to attack humanity again. The counter-invasion began 6 months later. The human fleet that left Earth wasn't the desperate force that had defended the solar system. This fleet was designed for offense. Fast ships with heavy weapons. Troop transports carrying soldiers who'd learned to fight in the vacuum of space. A mobile force that could strike anywhere and disappear before the enemy could respond. And at the center of the fleet, a new flagship, the UEES Vengeance. Admiral Santos commanded from its bridge, watching the stars streak past as humanity traveled to war. Behind her, the crew worked in focused silence. They knew what was coming. They knew what was at stake. They weren't afraid. The Krix home worlds were scattered across a vast region of space. Hundreds of planets connected by the Hive network. Some were breeding worlds where queens spawned trillions of drones. Others were industrial centers, building ships and weapons for the collective. And at the heart of it all was the Supreme Mind itself, housed in a fortress that had stood for 10,000 years. Santos didn't attack the fortress. Not yet. Instead, she attacked everything else. The first target was a breeding world called Nexus Prime. The Crix expected an assault from space orbital bombardment, landing parties, the standard tactics of civilized warfare. Instead, humanity used fire. Nexus Prime had an atmosphere rich in methane. Human scientists had discovered this during their analysis of Crix system. They designed a weapon specifically for this world. The missiles launched from Santos's fleet didn't carry explosives. They carried ignition charges. Hundreds of them, spread across the planet's atmosphere. The entire world burned. The Crix on Nexus Prime died screaming, their connection to the hive broadcasting their agony to the Supreme Mind. The queens, the drones, the billions of lives that had hoped to spawn the next invasion of Earth. All of them gone in a firestorm that lasted for weeks. Humanity had announced its presence. The Supreme Mind responded immediately. Fleets were dispatched to protect key systems. Defenses were strengthened around industrial worlds. The hive prepared for a war unlike any it had faced before. But humanity didn't fight like the hive expected. They didn't meet fleets in open battle. They didn't siege industrial worlds. They didn't follow any pattern the Supreme Mind could predict. They simply appeared, attacked and vanished. Human ships struck at supply lines, destroying convoys before they could reach their destination. Human soldiers infiltrated Crix stations, planting bombs that exploded days or weeks after they'd gone. Human hackers attacked the hive network, spreading chaos and confusion through the collective mind. And always, they learned. Every battle taught humanity something new about the Crix. Every captured piece of technology was analyzed and improved. Every weakness was exploited, then exploited again in ways the Crix never anticipated. The war spread across Crix space like a disease. Santos divided her fleet into strike groups, each one operating independently. They hit dozens of targets simultaneously, forcing the Supreme Mind to spread its defenses thin. When the Crix concentrated their forces in one area, human ships appeared in another. When they tried to protect everything, they protected nothing. It wasn't the kind of war the Crix understood. It wasn't even the kind of war most humans understood. It was something new, something born from desperation and refined by victory. Admiral Santos called it persistence warfare. We don't need to destroy every ship, she explained to her officers. We don't need to conquer every world. We just need to keep hitting them until they can't hit back. Until they understand that the cost of fighting us is higher than any benefit they could ever gain. And if they don't understand, asked her second-in-command, a young captain named Chen, grandnephew of the legendary Admiral Sarah Chen. Then we keep hitting them until there's nothing left to hit. The turning point came 18 months into the counter-invasion. Human forces had discovered something unexpected. Not all Crix were loyal to the Supreme Mind. On the outer edges of Crix space there were colonies that had been cut off from the hive network. Queens who'd developed their own thoughts. Drones who'd learned to question. The Supreme Mind called them defectives. Failures. It hunted them whenever they appeared, purging any sign of individual thought from the collective. But humanity saw something else. Admiral Santos sent envoys to the defective colonies. Not soldiers, not spies, just humans who wanted to talk, who wanted to understand. The conversations were difficult. The Crix defectives had never spoken with another species before. They didn't trust easily. They expected treachery at every turn, but humanity was patient. Over months of careful diplomacy, an understanding emerged. The defective Crix didn't want to be part of the hive. They wanted to think their own thoughts, live their own lives. They'd been fighting for survival against the Supreme Mind since before humanity existed. And now, for the first time, they had allies. The alliance changed everything. The defective Crix knew the hive network better than any outsider could. They knew its weaknesses, its secrets, its fear. They shared this knowledge with humanity. And humanity shared something in return. Hope. You are not defective, Santos told the queen who led the largest defective colony. You are free, and we will help you stay that way. The queen's response was simple. Then let us show you how to destroy the mind that imprisoned us. The assault on the Supreme Mind's fortress was the largest military operation in human history. 300 human ships, 50,000 soldiers, And alongside them, the defective cricks, queens, and drones who'd finally found the courage to fight back against the intelligence that had enslaved their kind for millennia. The fortress was everything the cricks had ever been, a structure the size of a small planet, bristling with weapons, shielded by technology that had held off attackers for 10,000 years. A monument to the power of the collective mind. It fell in 6 days, not because humanity was stronger, not because the defective cricks were braver. It fell because the supreme mind had never considered the possibility of betrayal. The fortress's defenses were designed to stop external attacks. They weren't designed to stop cricks' ships that carried the right codes, ships that had been given access generations ago, access that the supreme mind had never thought to revoke. The defective queens knew these codes. They shared them with humanity. Human soldiers poured through gaps in the defenses that the supreme mind hadn't known existed. They fought through corridors designed for creatures with 6 legs and compound eyes. They pushed deeper into the fortress than any outsider had ever gone. And at the center they found the supreme mind itself. It wasn't what they expected. Santos had imagined a computer, a machine, something that could be destroyed with explosives or disabled with a virus. Instead, she found a creature. The supreme mind was biological. A massive organism larger than a city that had grown over millennia to encompass the central core of the fortress. Its tendrils spread throughout the structure, connecting to the hive network, processing the thoughts of a billion cricks across the galaxy. It was alive, and it was afraid. "You cannot destroy me," it said, speaking directly into Santos' mind. "I am the collective. I am the hive. Without me, the cricks will become animals again, mindless drones without purpose or direction." "That's not what the defectives tell us," Santos replied. "The defectives are aberrations, mistakes. They will not survive without my guidance. They've survived this long. They'll survive longer without you hunting them." The supreme mind's fear turned to rage. "You are insects. You are nothing. I have existed for 10,000 years. I have conquered 1,000 species. You cannot." Santos raised her weapon. "You attacked our home. You tried to kill our children. You made us fight for our survival." She stepped closer to the creature that had threatened her entire species. "And now you're going to learn what happens when you make humanity desperate." She gave the order. The charges placed throughout the fortress detonated simultaneously. The explosion consumed the supreme mind, destroyed the central hub of the hive network, and shattered the structure that had seemed invincible for millennia. The Cricks collective died in an instant. Across the galaxy, billions of cricks suddenly found themselves alone in their own head. The voice that had guided them since birth was gone. The connection that had defined their existence was severed. Most of them went mad. The weeks that followed were chaos. Cricks' drones turned on each other. Queens fought for dominance. Worlds that had been orderly for centuries descended into civil war. Humanity didn't intervene. They watched. They waited. They helped the defective colonies protect themselves from the chaos. But they didn't try to impose order on the cricks. That wasn't their place. Eventually, the chaos subsided. The strongest queens established control over their own territories. The surviving drones formed new, smaller collectives. The cricks race didn't die. It transformed. And when the transformation was complete, the new cricks leaders sent a message to Earth. They didn't ask for forgiveness. They didn't offer excuses. They simply stated a fact. The war is over. We will not attack again. Humanity accepted the message without celebration. There was nothing to celebrate. Too many had died. Too much had been destroyed. But there was something to build on. Santos met with the defective queen who'd helped plan the assault on the supreme mind. The meeting took place on a neutral world, far from both human and crick space. "Your people are free now," Santos said. "What will you do with that freedom?" The queen considered the question carefully. Her species had been enslaved to the collective mind for so long that freedom was still a strange concept. "We will learn," she said finally. "We will grow. We will become something new." She paused. "And we will remember what you did for, not the killing that was necessary. We will remember the hope. Hope. You showed us that the supreme mind wasn't invincible, that change was possible, that even the oldest chains can be broken." The queen's compound eyes focused on Santos. "We will remember that, Admiral. And when your species needs allies, you will find them among us." It wasn't friendship. It was too early for friendship. But it was a beginning. Santos returned to Earth as a hero. The woman who'd led humanity's counterattack. The woman who'd destroyed the supreme mind. The woman who'd proven that no threat, no matter how vast, could overcome human determination. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. She felt old. She felt the weight of every life that had been lost under her command. But she also felt hope. Humanity had faced 2 invasions. They'd survived both. They'd proven themselves to the galaxy. Now they had to decide what kind of species they wanted to be. Not just warriors. Not just survivors. Something more. The Galactic Concord was watching. The Valanth were waiting. A universe of possibilities was opening before humanity. And for the first time in their history, humans were ready to reach out and grab it. But they'd do it their way. On their terms. Because that was what it meant to be human. 50 years had passed since the first Sith X ship entered the Sol system. 50 years of war. 50 years of law. 50 years of learning what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge of extinction. Now it was time for something new. The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord was as magnificent as it had always been. Crystal walls that pulsed with light. A ceiling that showed the stars themselves. Delegates from dozens of species gathered to discuss the fate of worlds. But the atmosphere was different now. The Sith X delegation sat quietly in the corner, their once proud scales dull with age and defeat. The Krix representatives, the few queens who'd emerged from the chaos after the Supreme Mind's destruction, huddled together, still learning how to think as individuals. The Omnith flickered nervously. The Bravari shifted their massive bodies with uncertainty. Everyone was waiting. Everyone was afraid. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and the human delegation entered. There were only 5 of them, a small group compared to the dozens of delegates from other species. But as they walked down the central aisle, every eye in the chamber followed them. Every mind focused on their approach. Commander Sarah Chen led the delegation. She was the granddaughter of Admiral Sarah Chen, who'd first faced the Sith X invasion. She was the great-niece of Captain Chen, who died defending Station Phoenix against the Krix. She carried the weight of her family's legacy in every step. Behind her walked 4 others. A general who'd led ground forces against the Krix, a scientist who'd cracked the Hive network's codes, a diplomat who'd negotiated the alliance with the defective queen, and a poet who'd written the words that kept humanity's spirit alive during the darkest days of the war. They reached the speaking platform and stopped. For a long moment, no one spoke. The hall was silent except for the soft hum of the living crystal, and the distant whisper of stars. Then the witness emerged from the shadows. The ancient Valanth hadn't changed in 50 years. Its crystalline form still towered above the other delegates. Its presence still commanded attention without effort. But there was something different in the way it looked at the human. Something that hadn't been there before. Respect. Humanity has asked to address the Concord, the witness said, its voice echoing through the vast chamber. The request has been granted. Commander Chen, you may speak. Sarah Chen stepped forward. She was 36 years old. She'd been born during the Sith X War and raised during the Krix invasion. She'd never known a time when humanity wasn't fighting for survival. Now she stood before the rulers of the galaxy, and she showed no fear. 50 years ago, she began, the Sith X came to our world. They came with demands. They came with weapons. They came with the certainty that we would surrender or die. She paused. We didn't do either. A murmur ran through the assembly. The Sith X delegates shifted uncomfortably. 15 years later, the Krix came. They came with more ships, more soldiers, more determination. They thought that what the Sith X failed to do with 16 dreadnoughts, they could do with 1,600. Her voice hardened. They were wrong. The Krix queens made sounds that might have been acknowledgement or shame. Your species have spent millennia building empires, conquering worlds, deciding who was civilized and who was not. You created rules for warfare, traditions for diplomacy, systems to determine who mattered and who didn't. Sarah Chen looked around the assembly, and then you met us. We didn't know your rules. We didn't follow your traditions. We didn't accept your system. When you came to conquer us, we fought back with everything we had. When you tried to destroy us, we survived. And when you thought you'd won, we rose again. She stepped closer to the delegates. The elders tried to warn you. The Valanth sealed us away for thousands of years because they understood something the rest of you didn't. We are not like you. We don't think like you. We don't fight like you. She paused. And now you fear us. The words hung in the air. No one denied them. You should fear us, Sarah Chen continued. Everything the elders said was true. We are dangerous. We are relentless. We hold grudges for generations. We fight with a fury that your species can't comprehend. When you threaten our homes, our families, our future, we become something terrible. She paused. But that is not all we are. The tone of her voice changed, softer now, almost gentle. When the Sith X War ended, we could have destroyed the Dominion. We had the power, the justification. Instead, we rebuilt their worlds. We treated their wounded. We gave them a chance to survive. She gestured toward the Sith X delegation. Ask them. Ask them if we showed mercy. Ask them if the species that terrified the Valanth also built hospitals on conquered worlds. The Sithak's ambassador, an old male with faded scales, nodded slowly. It is true, he said. We expected extinction. We received compassion. Sarah Chen turned to the Krix delegation. When the Supreme Mind fell, the Krix collective collapsed into chaos. Millions of your kind went mad. Worlds burned. Your entire civilization nearly destroyed itself. The queens shifted uneasily. We could have let you die. We could have finished what the war started. Instead, we helped the survivors find stability. We protected the defective colonies until they could protect themselves. We gave your species time to learn how to be free. One of the queens spoke, her voice clicking and strange to human ears. You destroyed our mind, our unity, everything we were. The Supreme Mind enslaved you. Sarah Chen replied. It controlled your thoughts. It decided your purpose. It hunted any Krix who dared to think for themselves. She met the queen's compound eyes. We didn't destroy your species. We liberated it. What you do with that freedom is your choice. But you have the chance to make that choice. That's more than the Supreme Mind ever gave you. The queen fell silent. Sarah Chen turned back to the full assembly. So here is the truth about humanity. We are capable of great destruction. We've proven that beyond any doubt. When you push us to the edge, we push back with everything we have. We don't stop. We don't surrender. We don't forgive easily. But we are also capable of great creation, great kindness, great hope. We build as fiercely as we fight. We heal as passionately as we destroy. We dream of a future where our children don't have to live in fear. She raised her voice. The elders called us monsters. They were half right. We are monsters who build hospitals. Predators who teach our prey to stand beside us. Warriors who would rather have friends than enemies. We didn't ask for these wars. We didn't seek conflict with any species in this galaxy. We were content on our own world, looking up at the stars and dreaming of what we might find among them. You came to us. You threatened us. You tried to destroy us. And now we stand before you, not as conquerors, not as supplicants, as equals. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembly. We are claiming our place in this galaxy. The quarantine is over. The isolation is finished. Humanity is here, and we are not going anywhere. You can accept us as partners. You can trade with us. Learn from us. Let us learn from you. Together we can build something better than any of us could build alone. Or you can fear us. You can scheme against us. You can plot and plan and wait for a moment of weakness. Her voice dropped cold and certain. But know that, if anyone else attacks our home, they will learn what the Sithaks learned, what the Krix learned, what the elders tried to warn you about for thousands of years. We don't know how to stop. We never have. So choose wisely. Silence fell over the great hall. The delegates looked at each other. Old rivals who'd spent centuries competing for power. Ancient species who'd thought themselves above the young races. Conquerors who'd never faced a species that could conquer back. All of them humbled by a people who'd clawed their way from caves to stars in the blink of a cosmic eye. The witness spoke first. You have proven everything we feared about you, it said. And everything we hoped. What did you hope? Sarah Chen asked. The ancient Valanth moved closer. Its crystalline form caught the starlight, scattering rainbows across the floor. We hoped that when you finally joined the galaxy, you would bring something new. Something none of us possessed. Its voice was soft, almost gentle. We hoped you would bring the courage to choose mercy over vengeance. To build instead of destroy. To reach out your hand to former enemies. The Sithaks attacked you, and you rebuilt their worlds. The Krix tried to exterminate you, and you freed them from slavery. You have every reason to hate, every justification for revenge. And yet here you stand, offering partnership. That is not weakness, Commander Chen. That is strength beyond anything we've seen in 10,000 years. The witness turned to address the full assembly. I propose that humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Concord, with all rights, all privileges, all responsibilities. They have earned this through blood and sacrifice. But more importantly, they have earned it through wisdom and compassion. The delegates voted. The votes came quickly. The Omnith voted yes. They'd watched humanity from the beginning and seen something precious in them. The Bravari voted yes. They'd been neutral in the wars, but they recognized strength when they saw it. The Sithaks voted yes. They'd been enemies once. Now they knew better. The Krix Queens voted yes, one by one. They owed humanity their freedom, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. Every species voted yes. Every single one. Sarah Chen stood on the speaking platform, watching the votes register. She felt the weight of history settling around her shoulders, the culmination of 50 years of war, the beginning of something new. She thought of her grandmother, who'd faced the Sith acts with nothing but courage and determination. She thought of her uncle, who died aboard Station Phoenix to buy humanity a few more hours. She thought of all the billions who'd fallen defending Earth and fighting for survival. They'd given everything so that this moment could happen. She wouldn't let them down. On behalf of humanity, she said, I accept your welcome. We look forward to learning from you, to sharing with you, to building a future together. She paused and allowed herself a small smile. But I also want to make something clear. Our nature hasn't changed. We are still the species that the elders warned you about. We are still capable of everything that terrified them. We choose peace. We choose partnership. We choose hope. But choice is something we do every day. And every day that choice remains ours to make. The message was clear. Humanity was offering friendship. But the alternative was always there, waiting. The same fury that had destroyed the Sith-Axe fleet and shattered the Krix collective. The choice belonged to the galaxy now. The assembly ended. Delegates dispersed to their ships. Messages were sent across the stars. The news of humanity's acceptance spread to every corner of known space. But the witness lingered in the Great Hall, watching the human delegation prepare to leave. Commander Chen, it called. Sarah turned back. Yet, the ancient Valanth approached her slowly. Its form flickered with colors she couldn't name. I have lived for a very long time. It said, I have watched species rise and fall. I have seen empires born and die. I thought I understood the patterns of the universe. And now I realize that I know nothing. The witness's voice held something that might have been wonder. You are unlike anything we've ever encountered. You terrify me. And you give me hope. Which feeling is stronger? The witness considered the question. Today. Hope. Sarah Chen smiled, not the cold smile that her enemies had learned to fear. A warm smile. A human smile. Then we're making progress. She turned and walked out of the Great Hall, leaving the witness alone with the stars. The future was uncertain. There would be challenges ahead. Not every species would accept humanity's rise. Not every conflict would end peacefully. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy had something it had lacked. A species that refused to give up, refused to surrender, refused to accept that some problems couldn't be solved. A species that carried both destruction and creation in their hearts, and chose every day which one to embrace. The elders had warned them about humans. They should have listened. But perhaps in the end, that warning wasn't about fear. Perhaps it was about hope. Hope that somewhere in the vast darkness of space, there was a species that could change everything. Hope that had finally found its answer. In a small blue world orbiting a yellow star, 8 billion humans looked up at the sky and saw their future. And for the first time in history, the stars looked back without fear. The war was over. The peace had begun.